Hello there and welcome to this vlog of May 2023, and today's video is something I've been wanting to do for a long time, which is a synopsis, overview, bit of analysis on the War of 3039. Now, I'll probably be calling this video something like the Forgotten War of 3039 because it kind of is forgotten, really, I think, in the pantheon of things that happen in BattleTech. I think that's a great tragedy for the setting, because I do really feel like the War of 3039 is incredibly interesting. It suffers though from something that we experience in real life history, where you've got something really important that happens in between two really massive, monumental historical events. Just off the top of my head, I suppose a good example would be the Japanese-Chinese War in the 1930s, which for me was kind of the start of World War II, right? But because we've got such a Western I suppose bias over the events of World War II, we call it 1939 to 1945. But if you look at the participants in play during that war, you can absolutely say that it all started when Japan, forgot their borders and started to invade the neighbouring countries, because that inherently led to major centrifugal events within World War II, things like Pearl Harbor, obviously bringing the Americans into the war. But it's kind of been forgotten, right? It's I think people see that era between the wars. I mean, in England we call it, or in Britain we call it, the peace between the wars. Other countries may call it things like that as well. Certainly wasn't peaceful in China during that time period. So you've got these massive events, and that was a huge event. Japan becoming a real imperial power, which was almost then it's really weird irony of history that it was eclipsed by obviously the rise of Nazism and the wars that then spread throughout the world. But in a way, Japan, that era of Japanese leadership, absolutely get away with what were utterly heinous war crimes, absolutely as bad as anything that the Nazis did. I mean, the situation in China during the 1930s was about as brutal as it gets. It was, I mean, debatable whether you'd call that a genocide. I'm sure some people do. I'm sure there's some historical precedent for that. I don't know. I don't know enough about it. Again, showing my ignorance of it, because it's seen as an event between events, which is for me what the War of 3039 is. And here is I suppose the canonical book to get if you are interested in this. It's a very good book. It's quite it's a newish book. It's 2004, which is, I suppose, newish in BattleTech terms, given that it's a an 80s IP. It's something that I think this book is, if you want to really delve into 3039, it really is a must-have, because you get things you won't be able to see this because the copy's way too small, but this is the deployment table. So this kind of shows you exactly what forces are around, where they are invading, things like that. Obviously, the joy of Sana, which is the BattleTech wiki, they will have distilled a lot of this intel and presumably put it into the War of 3039 article. But this just gives you, if you really want to get into it, this gives you more data. It will give you equipment ratings if you want to play campaigns, things of that nature. So really interesting book to have if you are playing tabletop. It also gives you all the kind of all the random unit assignment tables, otherwise known as rats, and they're really good to have anyway, because that will really give you an in-depth understanding of a force during a particular timetable. So this is the 3039. Predominantly it's fedcom and the Draconis Combine, but there will be other forces in here as well, I'd imagine, which we'll go on to talk about, because it's not just a fedcom Draconis war. It's the War of 3039. It basically encompasses all the inner sphere powers, so it's really, really very significant. More importantly for this video though, about this much of the book approximately is the lore. So you've got a, what's that? That's like a 4/5 split there or something. You can just see it is the actual lore of the of what happened in 3039. Really, really well done. I think it's one of those situations where you really kind of see the hubris of like victorious regimes. In this case, fedcom. You know, I am wearing my FedSons t-shirt today, as you will see, which is kind of ironic because in the War of 3039, I am absolutely Team Draconis Combine. I mean, I don't think there's no justification for the War of 3039, really. It's purely a war of, like, opportunism, expansionism, whatever that word is, expansion, a war basically to take land, which all wars are that effectively anyway, but this one is very much like Hans Davion trying to fulfill his, I don't know, presumably his teenage fantasy of destroying the Capellans and the Draconis Combine. He nearly does it to the Capellans, but he really does fall short here. So, you know, spoilers, I suppose, although this is something that happened a long time ago in BattleTech context. fedcom, I mean, there's an argument to suggest that the war is a draw, but a draw is a monumental failure for fedcom in like the final analysis of it, and really does stop all fedcom's like you know, ambitions and aspirations to take over the entire inner sphere, which is absolutely what Old Hans wants to do, but this is kind of the last card that he plays. The 3040s then are really just kind of the, you know, it's an interesting period actually, the 3040s, because it's just the lead up to the invasion of the clans, and at that time obviously the fedcom alliance, when the clans come about, is purely there just to kind of act in a defensive role for the inner sphere. They are like them and the Draconis Combine and the big meat grinder that the clans like come up against, you know, because comparatively speaking, obviously the Capellans, the Free Worlds League, are nowhere near clan space, or not clan space, but the part that the clans invade. So, you know, these two forces then, almost like this is the prelude to the clan invasion, which I'll talk about a little bit as well, because there is a very, very interesting incident with, you know, beloved Natasha Kerensky as well, which is really quite important to this, and it really does kind of show the hand of what is to come in the next decade across the inner sphere. Anyway, so how am I going to structure this? I was thinking about doing this video over several parts, but I don't think I'm going to do that. I think I'm just going to do it in one. I always do one take as well, so there'll be no editing. This will just be me doing this raw, so apologies for any hiccups, because it might go on for a little while, and I refuse to edit because I don't have time. But it is Bank Holiday Monday today in England, which means I have the day off work, so I'm spending this morning doing some well overdue recording. Right, I think the best place to start with then, when you talk about the War of 3039, are the characters involved, of which there are many, and I'm only going to deal with a select few here. You've got numerous like mercenary forces, you know, fleet admirals, generals, all things like that. For the purposes of this, I'm really just going to give a little synopsis of the kind of key, I say protagonist and antagonist loosely because they don't really exist in this war. I think there is one person who is standout good and incredibly talented. Everyone else is very much like shades of grey though to me. First of all, and I'll kind of mix this in with a little bit of the history as well of the people that I'm going to talk about and how they kind of got to the War of 3039. So first up, I suppose it's important we speak about you know, Hans Davion, right? Hans Davion, the Hans Davion is like what in England we would call a Marmite character. If you're not from England, you probably don't know what that means. Marmite is a yeast-based, like, I don't even know what you call it. It's like a spread that you put on toast, and it's quite famous in Britain that you either love Marmite, like you'll eat it on toast all the time, or literally even the sight of it will make you sick. Uh, I love it. I mean, I've always got Marmite in stock. I do enjoy Marmite on toast, but a lot of people don't. To a point where it's kind of that is the expression. I think that's like the branding like phrase that the company use as well. You know, like they've like onboarded with that and kind of embraced it. But Hans Davion is absolutely a Marmite character. He is. There's no doubt that Hans is talented. And he's an interesting person as well because he was never there. He was never set up to be the leader of the Federated Sons. He was his brother died. I think it was like, I'm trying to remember my BattleTech history here. It's something like 3012 or something like that. And then Hans basically gets like catapulted into the position of First Prince. Undoubtedly a talent. I mean, he is what I'd consider very much an original thinker. He's a very, very talented military guy, especially in like the early years. You know, famously like pilots a battlemaster, and he's very good at it. I mean, there are like instances of Hans just kind of strapping into the battlemaster and going to kind of fight the Death Commandos as they drop people on New Avalon. I think that's quite a famous story from what I remember. So like there's no doubt in his like bravery and tenacity and things like that. He also like oversees like the beginning of the Renaissance era for the inner sphere. So in that 3025 era, you've got like the Avalon Institute of Science like coming up with all kinds of like interesting like rediscoveries from history, things like double heat sinks, things like that. Now I'm not saying that's just Hans, but Hans is the forefront of that culture as it's like the leader of of House Davion, obviously. And it happens under his tenure, and he obviously likes that. I mean, I don't think any inner sphere power wants to not rediscover amazing lost tech things. So, he's no different from the others in that respect. But Hans is very much a character that espouses his age. I think that's how to say it. But is he a monster? That's I suppose the perpetual question that we are left with Hans, because he probably causes the deaths of more people than pretty much anyone in that century. I mean, even if you kind of look at the clan invasion, which was kind of, although horrific, was confined to a relatively narrow, like, geographical window across the inner sphere. Whereas Hans dragged everyone into war from from the outskirts of the periphery through to through to Comstar. I mean, their engagement in this is quite famous that we'll go on to talk about. Obviously the alliance with the Lyrans causing this massive social earthquake where everyone was so shocked that that this alliance had been created. I mean, to say that sent shivers of fear through all the other inner sphere powers, including Comstar, is an understatement. Like, they will have despised this. It really did give them a massive upper hand. I mean, as it was kind of sold, it was like Davion ingenuity with Steiner like industrial might and commercial might. So just a very duplicitous Marmite character, you would say, Hans Davion. Who is not a Marmite character, though, is Melissa Steiner, who is his wife at this time. Probably one of the most famous stories in BattleTech, where it's how the Fourth Succession War kicks off, and it's Hans' first real delving into crazy power games when he basically creates the Fourth Succession War, or undertakes the Fourth Succession War predominantly against the Capellans, and he announces it at his wife's he and his wife's wedding. Which would have been a good gig to be at. I mean, talk about interesting weddings. Just start a war. And that was a pretty brutal war in itself. But that was a very, very big success for Fedcom. what would become Fedcom, because they wanted to basically not have any boundary between their borders, so they just cut a swathe through Capellan like territory, and created that window of opportunity, so to speak, between the Lyrans and the Federated Sons. So Melissa is a beloved character. Going back to Melissa, she is talented in her own right as well, great administrator, politically shrewd, not a military person at all. I mean, I think she would have been the first one to admit that. Was obviously very, very young when she married Hans. I think she was literally like 16, something like that, 16 to 18. Was done purely out of necessity in order to formalise the alliance, though. So Melissa is, she's very much a bit part player in this. She doesn't engage with it militaristically. Deep down, she will have absolutely not have been on board with this, but she's still kind of, she may crop up from time to time within the storyline. Who is, I suppose, a little bit more important than Melissa in regards to the history of this, though, is her mother, Katrina Steiner. Katrina Steiner is probably my favourite character in BattleTech. I've said that a few times before. She is a real genius. I mean, she is. I often think, she was the one that really kind of put out the peace in the first place, and said to the other inner sphere powers, "Does anybody want to get around the negotiation table, as opposed to all these ridiculous succession wars that we've been having for years?" Hans took her up on that offer, and that's kind of a good way to kind of give a synopsis of their characters. That I think Hans was always playing second fiddle to Katrina. Katrina was the brains behind it, and I think if she'd have been a little bit younger, because she dies actually very soon after the War of 3039, if not just before the peace or just after the peace gets signed, I can't remember, but she dies in 3040. So all these kind of machinations with her daughter in forming the Fedcom Accords are 15 years before this, basically. And I do think it is a tragedy that Hans is the one that was taking the lead on it. If it was Katrina, I think Katrina would have done a far better job of it, and may have been able to kind of get the other three powers around the negotiation table, as opposed to Hans's notion, which was, let's just go and conquer them. But Katrina was, I suppose, a little bit hamstrung because, she was coming. Not that she was massively old or anything, but Hans was the military person within that relationship. Katrina was a military person as well, but Hans was the way that their agreement fell. It was kind of the burden was on him, and obviously then Katrina got ill into the 3030s, and that I think gave Hans the real kind of push that he needed to go and just do what the hell he wanted. So that's why I think with Katrina kind of bowing out, that's where her importance is in this, is the fact that she's not really around, because she's on her deathbed during the War of 3039. And I'm not saying Katrina she's not like some noble bright character, she's still allowed the Fourth Succession War. And Steiner was certainly involved in that, but I think she would have seen the War of 3039 as absolute folly, which what it turned out to be. So they're the kind of key characters on the Fedcom sides. There are others as well that may come up in this, people like Norrie Steiner, but I'm not going to have time here to kind of go through everyone, because there are quite a few people. So what we'll do instead, I'll move on now to the two real central people for the Draconis Combine. So these are the defendants in this case, really, people on the defence. The first one is Takashi. I can never say his name. It's Takashi Kurita. I always want to say it differently. Takashi is really in this era is one of the proper old guard. You could imagine Takashi quite easily being the coordinator of the DC back in the Star League era. Really an embodiment of that society. He is at equal measure ruthless, brutal, and honourable. I think that's why the Draconis Combine and House Kurita are really popular, because they are so interesting. Their society is so interesting. I mean, you can if you're looking at it from a modern day stance, it's horrific, but they are just so cool. I mean, space samurai with big mecha. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So Takashi is really the, a monster character in this, far from innocent as well. I mean, war crimes central with this guy. Terrible father as well. So he's not absolutely not a protagonist in this. Most importantly for this setting though, and you remember Takashi, and people forget this, he outlives Hans Davion. Hans basically dies of a heart attack in 3052, so after the clan invasion's done and dusted. Takashi lives like a couple of years more. There's a lot of debate on how he dies. Some people think that he is forced to commit like ritualistic suicide, but I don't know if that ever got confirmed or not. But anyway, yeah, Takashi, even at this point, is like a wise old head with very definite ideas about how to run his state and what it means to run that state. Unfortunately, no, I suppose for the DC, by 3030, Takashi had really spiraled into like a bit of a paranoia spiral. Very famous. I mean, he had a big spat with Jamie Wolfe and the Wolves Dragoons, which led to him declaring death to all mercenaries. That was a huge factor. I think that was genuinely a factor why Hans felt able to go for the Draconis Combine, because as we'll see when we talk about this, the mercenaries are always... I mean, it's why I'm actually team Fedsons. It's got really... Partly because I recognise their society as well, in terms that it's a bit of a monarchy with an underline of democracy, much like Great Britain. Although I suppose we're the reverse. We're much more democratic, and then our monarchy is just a ceremonial head of state, so to speak. So reverse in the Fedsons, but I still understand that. But the most important thing is I love mercenary forces, and most mercenary forces, or the good ones anyway, are aligned with the Fedsons or the what becomes the Federated Commonwealth. So I think the fact that the Draconis Combine were going into this, just literally declaring death to mercenaries, and then Hans was like, yes, so do you want to hook up with us, mercenaries, and then you can act in a support to my militaristic regiments, and we can just go and conquer the Draconis Combine. I mean, again, it didn't turn out like that, but I can well understand why a lot of mercenary units were keen to get a swift, not just the money, obviously that would have been the main factor, but just to be able to say, yeah, death to mercenaries, let's see how you like this then. And that was a horrible decision, really. It's one reason why I could never play DC, because they just do not like mercenaries at all, and I love my mercenaries. It was then like, as every decade goes on then, so as you get into 3030s, 3040s, 3050s, Takashi just gets worse and worse. He becomes a complete shell of who he was. He becomes increasingly paranoid. He is obsessed that his son, who we'll talk about in a second, who really is the protagonist in this piece, he's trying to kind of get power from him, and just constantly keeps him down, tries to kind of bully him into submission, which is a shame. But, out of that, I suppose, out of that animosity that his son faces, we do create one of the great characters in BattleTech. And that is, of course, Theodore Kurita, otherwise known as Teddy Kurita. Brilliant from a young age, like a top student, really kind of good at the military side of it. But he had one fatal flaw for Draconis Combine society. He was rebellious. Kind of, I suppose, summed up by the fact that in a lot of like pictures with Teddy, he's like wearing long hair and has a mustache, which is like not in keeping with like Draconis Combine traditions. It is a very regimented society. So yeah, he faced the ire of his father for like his rebellious like nature. I love it. I would like to think that giving him like the long hair and the mustache is a bit of an ode to a lot of like Roman historical accounts that we have. I can't remember who wrote, maybe Cicero that I read this in, and he used to talk a lot about like the generation that was Julius Caesar's generation were seen as really rebellious. They were like the equivalent of like the punk generation back in the in the classical era, and the historians often refer to it as, oh, he or she wore their belt loose, right? And that was it keeps repeating that point over and over, which is very much these people were not in keeping with the traditions. That is not how you wore a toga, that kind of thing. I feel like Teddy's that kind of character. Becomes like massively important to this story. I suppose this segues as nicely into like I suppose like the pre-war era, which is central to what happens in the War of 30-39. But effectively, you had a situation with Teddy, and it's again another irony. He's way more like Hans Davion than he's like his father. Like he's not that like as I said previously, Hans was never supposed to be like first prince. Teddy is, but Teddy's been kept away from it and kept down from it. So I suppose they maybe both have a chip on their shoulder for that, for the same chip on the shoulder, but for different reasons, that kind of thing. Military, not just a military genius, but also a strategical genius as well. Because even as first in line to the Draconus Combine throne, he still has a lot of power despite what his father tries to do to him. And one thing he does, and it's really a mark of genius, in 30-30, I think, not just Teddy, I think the Draconus Combine know that Hans is going to come for them at some time or another. Teddy brokers an agreement with Comstar. Really interesting agreement as well. Turns out to be like the salvation of the War of 30-39 for the Draconus Combine. What is this then? Well, he basically, the agreement is that the Rasselhag Republic that's about to get its own autonomy, become its own state, which, if you don't know, the Rasselhag Republic is that like sliver of land between the Lyran Commonwealth and the Draconus Combine. Really like rebellious, have wanted their own like state for a long time. Teddy agrees to give it up on the grounds that Comstar are then going to basically fund and provide a ton of military equipment and military advances to the Draconus Combine for the inevitable war that's coming against FedCom. This suits Comstar because Comstar hate the FedCom alliance. It's basically seen as a big threat to their power base. So they're happy to go in with the Draconus Combine. What they also want, I mean, Comstar are a little bit like, the British in, like Napoleonic era Europe. They just want to keep the status quo. So they want to keep all the kind of five inner sphere powers just collectively where they are and just fighting like skirmish wars, using mercenary as proxies, because that suits them. And no one's going to kind of get the Star League up and running again, which means Comstar can basically maintain their stranglehold on things. So great, really, really good thinking there by Theodore. And all he has to give up is a rebellious province. Why does this become massively important, though? Because when the Rasselhag Republic gets kind of announced, I think people like Hans will have looked at that of, oh, look, the Draconus Combine is losing its way. These rebellious fractions are starting to out now. He was completely wrong, though. Like I said, I mean, fair enough. There were plenty within the Draconus Combine who hated the, what happened with the Rasselhag Republic, and it went on to create what we'll talk about shortly, which is the Ronin Wars. But Teddy knew that they probably couldn't keep it anyway, and it was it's like you'll sacrifice that one pawn, so to speak, like a rebellious part of the fringe of the like society or the country, the nation, in order that then you can get all this amazing like military equipment. You also get a buffer state between you and your main enemies. And most importantly, this was a really symbolic loss to the Lyrans in particular. When the Rasselhag Republic was created, all the wins that they got in the Fourth Succession War against the Draconus Combine were given to the Rasselhag Republic, basically, or most of them were. So Lyrans were not happy about that at all, and it took a lot of like negotiation with them to kind of allow their part of the Rasselhag Republic to get its freedom. And people often think of that as well, that people always just assume that, oh yeah, the Rasselhag Republic just hated the Draconus Combine. No, the Rasselhag Republic hated the Draconus Combine and the Lyran Commonwealth, did not like either of them, both oppressed them. Again, it's bias within BattleTech, because the Lyrans are kind of I suppose like a Western European organised power, and the Kurita Draconis Combine are like an oriental, like, you know, this feudalistic Japanese society that's very, very like highly strung and quite brutal. We often forget that all the inner sphere powers are in equal measure horrible. It's just that it manifests itself in different ways. So, you know, it's not like the Lyrans were assisting. Oh, you know, they're our Swedish Nordic brothers over there that need freedom. No, they didn't feel like that at all. They wanted all that territory to be their own. And, you know, like the Lyrans have many issues as well with like their own insurgencies. I mean, they're constantly getting, you know, like the Sky, which is the famous rebellion part in Lyran territories, often just having revolutions and causing problems and whatnot because they feel oppressed. So that's the Comstar thing is massive in this. I suppose just the second point is that, you know, if that's one major factor, if Comstar are like a big like ace up the sleeve of the Draconis Combine, the other massive factor is that fedcom, I mean, again, at this juncture, by 3039, it is fedcom, but it's something, it's not at all a unified place, right? Like, it's a manufactured state between two states which have already got many internal problems, as all the successor houses do. Apart from maybe I suppose the Capellans do as well. I mean, they have like St. Ives, you know, that sort of rebellious area. So they all have their own rebellions. I think the Capellans are slightly more fanatical than the others, though. So probably a little bit more. There's a bit more can't say that word. There's a little bit more like collective nature between the Capellans than there is between the, you know, maybe the other, especially like the Free Worlds League, which is just a massive sway of different cultures, all kind of mixed in together that just try to do the best they can. fedcom is kind of more on that Free Worlds League side as well. I've already spoken about Sky. I mean, Sky's the famous one in terms of its like rebelliousness against like first the Lyrans, then fedcom. You know, and I think it looks, because we just see it from top down, we just see the map and you just see this massive sway of fedcom territory. You think, oh, it's a unified state. It's really not. It's just a manufactured state. It reminds me a lot of the during the 100 Years' War with France and Britain, where Britain like held territory of vast swathes of France, but they were never British, right? Like the British didn't consider them British. The British, and it was a weird thing because the British kings were effectively French anyway. I'll probably have much more in common with the French than they did with the peasants over on the little island. But it was a weird thing. Like even though it looked like unified kingdoms in terms of, you know, the areas that Britain held power over, it really wasn't. And it's kind of the same with fedcom to some ways. It's just what looks like, even like with the military, like cohesion was not good. Both were very different militaries. Steiner is famously wants like heavy assault mechs and vehicles, and really has no meritocracy within its military. So you're given military positions because of who your basically family is. Davion, much more of a meritocracy, but also favour that like light and medium like mech warfare. So now, yeah, I suppose you could say that if they'd have gelled that collectively, you would have the best of all worlds. You know, hopefully the meritocracy may have resonated into the Lyrans, and you know, maybe that tactical astuteness of the Davions, and then again the industrial might to get more heavies and assaults for the Federated Sons. But it didn't work like that, and it was never going to work like that. You had elements within like the Lyran Commonwealth, which I've spoken about on this channel before, the Brotherhood of Cincinnatus, I can't remember how you say his name now. They were desperately trying to kind of break this up. They saw it as a real like threat towards like Lyran superiority. So they were not at all the unified, you know, that you see that fist in that glowing, well, it's this, isn't it, basically, the glowing sun of the Fed Sons, and it looks unified. It's a PR stunt. And it was never really any more than that, and that's why it never survived. So, you know, it's something where, again, those two I think are the real like major factors in terms of what the pre-war factors to put into place of how this all kind of generated this what looked like mass momentum for the Federated Suns and the Lyrans, but it all kind of went very, very badly. And the initiative was always with the Draconis Combine. They'd done the better preparation. They were against a very ununified force, whereas they were ununified as well by the looks of it because of Rasselhagen, because of what we'll talk about in a second, which was the Ronin War. But it's just something where it's that's what I love. That's why I love the War of 3039. Everything is reversed, right? So what you look at it, what it seems at prima facie is all wrong. The Draconis Combine were far better prepared, far more unified, but because of the way that PR was spun, it looked like Fedcom had all those advantages, and they simply didn't. Suppose we better talk about the Ronin Wars then. That's quite a big factor in this, and again, another. For what I'd consider, it was almost a very beneficial thing for Teddy, because after the Draconis Combine basically retreated from the Rasselhagen Republic, a lot of the Draconis Combine fanatics refused to do that, stayed there, and they then declared Ronin, which is basically like warriors without a lord, so outcasts. In a way, though, again, I don't know if this was just a happy accident or Teddy's genius, but every enemy that Teddy then had just been outed. So all he had to do was defeat them, which he did, and that was it. Like, everyone else that came with him, he then knew was unified, and that's kind of getting up into the late 3030s era now. Mixing that as well with by that period, the Comstar relationship had been in since 3030, as you then have 9 years to prep. They didn't know it was 9 years, obviously, but they worked hard to kind of get, the Draconis Combine worked hard to get that initiative into place in regards to their technology. So you had all manner of new mechs coming around. You had things like the Hatamoto Chi, which is the failed Charger chassis, which is a famously bad mech in BattleTech, mixing it with the old Star League design of the Thug, and you get the Hatamoto Chi, which is basically 2 PPCs, 2 SRM6s. So at that time, pretty nasty mech. You had not so successful ones either. You had what would become the Mauler. The initial variant of the Mauler is god awful, but it eventually becomes okay in time. But the Draconis Combine initial variant is a complete death trap, so it's not all good. You have rediscoveries of technology as well at this time. You start seeing things like LBX weaponry. I think, is it the Katana, which is the reimagined version of the Crockett. Again, the Crockett's an old Star League mech. It's something the designs get given to the Draconis Combine because of the Comstar agreement. They turn it into the Katana. The Katana has an LB-10X on there, in and around 3035, that mech, so it's there in time for the War of 3039. Very powerful mech as well at that time. The LB-10X is a very, very powerful weapon. It's 1 ton lighter than a regular AC. It hits on clusters. You get bonuses to hit. It's just, in that era where you don't get that much Lost Tech kicking around, it's very, very powerful. So again, that's my kind of little, I suppose, synopsis there of why the pre-war, as to why it was so so positive looking for the Draconis Combine, and Fedcom just almost fell into a horrific trap, which really did go on to to cause what I'd consider, again, it kind of ground old Hans's ambitions to a halt, and just created, it was a nice setup in a lot of ways for the clan invasion, because there was kind of a, things, not that they got stagnant, but the 3040s is definitely just the run up to the clan invasion. So it's, in a way, it's the Draconis Combine, I think, did everyone a favour just by pushing Fedcom back on this one. Otherwise, you would have probably had a much weaker Innisphere when the clan invasion. Instead, you had a pretty powerful Draconis Combine and a pretty relatively stable, powerful Fedcom at that time as well. In 3050, Right, let me just check my list. I've got a little list in front of me here, so I'm just making sure I've not forgotten anything. I suppose, yeah, one other thing, we'll touch on this. It goes back to Comstar as well. It's kind of a secondary point, but Comstar are obviously I mean, there's so many cliches about Comstar. You know, I mean, people just what they call them, AT&T in space or whatever, and I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about Comstar. I think I kind of blame Tex for this because Tex has put so many like notable videos out about Comstar, and so many phrases I think are attached to them. You know, like it might not be Tex. Tex might be getting this from the wider community that I'm unaware of or whatever. But and I'm saying that loose. So it's obviously it's not no one's fault. It's just the way that Comstar is now perceived, and there's a lot of cliches flying around about them. What Comstar are an incredibly successful corporate who have a monopoly on communications and money, which is insane when you think about it. That's like the worst of the worst that you'd get from a capitalist corporation, controlling two of the most important facets of like society. So, but where they're also like very good is in like the dark arts. So like in spying, espionage, keeping secrets, things of that nature. They are very good. So I think this like two-dimensional thing that we think about with Comstar is just wrong. Like they are far more than that. I mean, they even have a very extensive military that's kind of kept in hiding up until the clan invasion. But the Comms Guard are very successful. They have a massive like industrial like might to fall back on, but they give effectively the Draconis Combine like open access to their like espionage and like spy networks and things like that. And I think that battle for intelligence prior to the actual war kicking off is absolutely super important to this whole affair. And I think that's what that 9 years between that agreement being signed in 3030, or say signed loosely, I presume it's more like a gentleman's agreement between Teddy and Comstar. But it's something that you know the I think when you kind of analyse it, that 9 year period, the technology, the like I said, the spy networks, the shrewdness of how they kind of dealt with the Rassilal Republic, just all kind of start to add up. And at that point, all then that Hans Davion has got is a military hammer, which is very significant and very powerful. But that hammer alone is not enough to kind of beat, you know, a dagger in the side that this very nimble, very tight force, when it comes up to 3039, is willing to plant, you know, or to basically go up against like the Fedcom forces with. So what I'll do now, we're 40 minutes into this video and we're just about to get into the actual war itself. And the war itself, I think, is probably the most uninteresting part of this. So I'm probably going to fly through this a little bit. I think one part of the war is more interesting than another, I'll put it that way. But the first part is really not interesting. And it goes exactly how you would expect it to go if you're kind of looking at a hammer blow from a massive like military force like the like Fedcom have here. And it effectively, I mean, Hans almost engages the whole like war off the back of a false flag operation. He kind of comes out, and there's a lot of, again, Davion are wonderful at this. The PR guys of BattleTech's, probably why I like them as well. They come out and say that there are like violent suppressions occurring of pro-Davion, you know, like revolutions in these Draconis Combine worlds. And then this is on April the 15th. Then Hans comes out and says that he's going to take action to, you know, to deal with this, what he calls Kuritan tyranny, and they declare war basically. And as you'd expect, again with that hammer blow, there are massive successes for Fedcom in the early days. By the end of April, they have got 30 worlds. So you're talking in 15 days they've taken 30 worlds. And it really does look, on the face of it, like they're just going to do what they did in the Fourth Succession War and just cut through Draconis Combine space. In that era as well, no matter how well they prepared for it, I don't think there's any like doubt at all that the DC was in absolute chaos. A lot of this, I think, is because Teddy's the salvation for it. His father, though, is the problem. He still doesn't really understand like the modern military tactics and how much they've moved on since he was like young. But Theodore does, and when Theodore comes in to step in, and basically gets, centrifugal to the defence plans. Before that, just a quick word on Teddy. Probably should have raised this when I was dealing with him as a character. But his father sends him to the Legion of Vega. If you don't know, the Legion of Vega, really interesting. It's basically where like anyone, like any dishonourable warriors or criminals or anything get put, who can pilot mechs basically from the Draconis Combine. Their emblem is that of like a big gnarly rat, which kind of says it all. And Teddy gets very, very prominent in the Legion of Vega, and because they become like a real significant fighting force. And I suppose it kind of really focuses on the fact that Teddy is an unconventional character at this time and seen as rebellious, and he's then he gets into this rebellious force, that kind of thing. So by this time, Teddy has got a lot of experience and has done a lot of military feats that are beyond the kind of scope of this video. But that's, again, that's where we're at here. It's like chaos, massive success. Teddy then steps in. The Commonwealth as well, they have quite a successful thrust. That's Operation Winter Schnee. This is led by Nori Steiner. She basically, I've just written it down here, isolates the Davion district from the rest of the DC. So you basically, again, you can see the maps. They are in here. I don't know if I can find them now. I probably won't bother. But there's like, if you know that like that border between, it just arrows everywhere. If you look at that, like, the map from that initial war, it's just like the Steiners are going in hard at one area. They're kind of splitting off areas of the Draconis Combine so they lose their supply line, so they can then pick them off at their will. And it's just a disaster for Kurita in that first few weeks. Wave 2 then, so this is basically used as a method, as all second waves are, to build on the successes of the first wave, consolidate forces on the, that they've already taken, worlds that they've already taken, things like that. What they also wanted to do, and it kind of ties into Operation Winter Schnee, they also wanted to really kind of focus on tying that noose around Davion, which is a big part of Draconis Combine space. There's lots of things happen. This is where it starts going wrong for fedcom in a lot of ways. Now, again, bit outside the scope of this, and it goes into the bit what we're saying about Comstar's Machiavellian tendencies. Because they hated the idea of fedcom, they kind of cut off their access to the HPG network. So fedcom were using this thing called the black box, which was kind of a version of the HPG which just wasn't as good. So their communication lines were pretty poor. That's again testament to how Comstar, fedcom to this purpose, are just a very unsophisticated hammer. They don't have the wider kind of facets that you need to win a military campaign like this. Bad communication networks. In a way, I suppose you can look at it. It's like what the Russians are now facing in Ukraine. In fact, that would be a wonderful analogy. It's popped in my head about how fedcom in this are effectively the Russians just putting things into a meat grinder and just hoping for the best, and then not realizing actually we don't have the nuances and the technology, and we're going up against an opponent who has these things, and even though they're smaller, they're far more driven than we are. So that might be a video for another day. It's just flown into my head. I'll make a mental note of that. But yeah, very similar to this situation. That problem with communications, as you would expect, causes a major drama. While fedcom forces from the Lyran side think that one thing is happening, they might be 3 days behind that because of the black box lag, which is what I think they called it. And then this really then gets up into this is now going into July, so we're on July 12th at this point. This is where Teddy decides to counter-attack, which is a very, very bold move on his part and very successful. one thing that he does in this second wave period of it, they really like take to the I suppose it's the old adage of cutting the head off the snake, which is exactly what they try to do, and they do this by basically taking the like the Commonwealth theatre command structure down. They then also create a very, very successful counter-attack into fedcom territory, which is, again, parallels with what's happening in Ukraine, potentially. I mean, they're looking at doing a massive counter-attack, although not into Russian territory, I would imagine, but certainly in this case they do go into fedcom territory. It's all like a ruse as well. It's absolute genius by Teddy. He basically creates like specialist forces to do this. Like the best of the best, but they're much, much smaller than they proclaim to be. And I think it gets to a point. This is now getting into like October in this when the counterattack's been going on for a while, and the actual encroachment into Draconis Combine space is now halted. So it's effectively like he turns what looks like a massive invasion into just a series of hit and run attacks that make it look more wildly powerful than they actually are. And that is the one thing that really spooks Hans, because he's like, okay, we're in this meat grinder situation in way beyond our lines that's, ground to a halt in Draconis Combine space. And then we've got this counter-attack that could literally spiral right into Federated Suns territory, and we could lose a lot more than we actually seek to gain. And it established things as well. I mean, one thing off the back of this is kind of, I suppose, for the post-game analysis of what happens with the war. I mean, the Draconis Combine makes some amazing captures in across the Fed Suns. They, for instance, get the factory that creates the Victor. The Victor is, I think the Victor is created in several factories, but you'll see at this point then, I mean, that's massive, right? Like, BattleTech's in this era are still not massively common. So to get a factory of that standing, much like the Fedcom did during the Fourth Succession Wars when they took Tikhonov, and they kind of then got the ability to make Catathrax and Ravens, which were the new Capellan mechs. In this, it's like the absolute reversal. And the Victor is like really seen as a Fed Suns like mech. I know it's a mech that you find everywhere, and it's got Capellan leanings as well. But it's a mech that the Fed Suns love, right? And one of their key factories has been lost, and that in of itself, I mean, you can say that it's a score draw in terms of territory, or not much is lost or gained on either side. But what the Draconis Combine do gain is massively important, even if it's not, 100 worlds. It's still factories that the Federated Suns will absolutely end up missing. So I suppose the other interesting thing about this, so that's kind of that then brings the end of the war effectively. Like, at that point when Fed Suns pull back, Teddy's ruse works, so he kind of goes back. And then it's kind of at this juncture, or towards the end of what's happening in that theatre, that the Capellans and the Free Worlds League decide to invade, which of course they do, because they're seeing, oh look, it's going really badly for the Feds here. Let's try and reconquer some of the worlds and the land that was taken from us in the Fourth Succession War. Now, it's something that they don't claim vast quantities back, and a lot of it as well, because it's at this point, and I remember reading this in the book, this is where the Wolf Dragoons really come into it. They end up going in on the side of Fedcom, but almost in a defensive act. So they're not there in the Draconis Combine attacking necessarily, but they're there defending, the Fed Suns against the Free Worlds League and the Capellans. Because the Wolf Dragoons do have a solid relationship with Fedcom, so it's something that it's more raids more than anything. But there are some really interesting things that happen at this time. Probably the most interesting by a mile is that there is the reborn Black Widows Battalion, which is Natasha Kerensky's baby. They absolutely rout and destroy the 18th Maric Militia on Hall. This is on Christmas Day, 3039. And this is I mean, Natasha Kerensky before this was, you know, relatively famous, but this really kind of solidifies her as a real centrifugal force, like in the BattleTech galaxy. And most interestingly for this, it's because they're effectively using clan tactics and strategies. So it is the first time that we ever see a clan cluster just obliterating effectively what is a, you know, like a Star League regiment configuration. So, you know, like you've got the lances and the companies. So it just shows how much more powerful these like 15 units, or the, you know, units of 5 effectively for the clans. And that's just a real great precursor, and it comes obviously at the very ends of the wars of 3039. So I think that's a lovely like stepping stone into the, you know, what becomes then the clan invasion. It's the real precursor to that. So a lovely bit of like historical foreshadowing going on, I think. They do make gains as well, but you know, both the Capellans and the Free Worlds League, but it's not like a mass revenge for the Fourth Succession War or anything like that. So let's do the blood and treasure cost then. So out of this whole sorry affair, where untold, you know, thousands, if not millions of people died, Fedcom gained 7 worlds. Which there's a side note on this, 3 of which were actually taken by the mercenary forces. So a monumental failure for Fedcom by any like stretch of the imagination. Given the perceived advantages that they had, not really. The capture of Quentin by the Draconis Combine, and this is what I was talking about with the Victor. So it's the world of Quentin. That's where the Victor is manufactured, and that really does. That's the big prize that the Draconis Combine get out of this. And I mean, that kind of brings us to the end, I suppose. If you want to have a final thought on this or something like that, it really does kind of show up the hubris of Hans Davion. Again, I think had Katrina Steiner been alive, this would have gone very differently. I think had Melissa Steiner been older and had more power over her husband, which she always kind of, I think, struggled to do because she married him at such a young age, I think then things maybe would have gone differently here, or it wouldn't have been so like, or he wouldn't so arrogantly just assume that he was just going to walk in and do what he did during the Fourth Succession War. This was a very different situation and time. Comstar for me are the massive like differential in this. Had it not been for like all the, you know, the spy networks, the bringing down of the HPG network for Fedcom, the providing of all that technology and those mech designs to the Draconis Combine and all the planning that went into it, I think that is by far the most important thing. Obviously, Teddy is the knife, you know, the kind of the power that then wields what Comstar gave him, and he does it very effectively. But he never could have done what he did, especially when he makes those like counterattacks into FedSun space. Yeah, I think it is it's Fedcom, but I think it is into FedSun territory, traditional FedSun territory. So it's a wonderfully interesting period. Go and play this. You know, even if you don't get this, there's still loads to research on it. Even like this is the first time I think when you get like the rats tables giving you that like new tech. So you do get things in there, you know, like the was like the katana and things of that nature, where you are looking at like the new iterations of BattleTech technology and mech technology that kind of get then into the clan invasion. And I just think it's, like I said, I wanted to do this video as just like a homage to that period, that piece, which it wasn't at all, in between those two great wars, like the Fourth Succession War and the clan invasion. There is still an incredible amount of interesting things going on in BattleTech around that 3030 era, and this is really the kind of the pinnacle of it all. Such amazing characters. I mean, I think Teddy Kurita, reading about him quite a bit as well for like preparation of this, he really is a likable character. I think it was the second phase of the early writers of BattleTech trying to reimagine what the Capellans and the Draconis Combine were, as opposed to being those like mustachio twirling villains. It's far more complex than that, really, and as it should be, because they were very two-dimensional in the early iterations of BattleTech, and this really kind of fleshes them out to be so they have got their brutality to them, but they've also got their massive strengths and really important characters, and you never really saw that before. Like the fourth succession war was always the Capellans are weak, we're going to crush them. This though is very different. And that's why I love it. It's just like I was saying earlier, it's all those expectations that I think that we have from looking at it from the outset of the Federated Sun should have gone and walked all over them. No, it was completely, there was so many little nuanced things going on that were just so important and interesting. Anyway, I'm glad I've done that, because I've been promising to do that for weeks and weeks. So what I'm going to do now is I really want to get back into doing lore vids as well. I'm probably going to do over the next couple of weeks. I did a video ages ago that didn't record correctly. Like my voice sync is out with the video, and it's on my old camera, and I did it at night, and it's a video of a very good premise in about the Ares convention, but no one watched it. It's before this kind of channel, not that this channel has taken off, it will always be a very small channel, but I think I've got a degree of an audience now, especially through things like DFA, the podcasts, the vodcast, that I'm doing with Aaron and Tom. It's kind of, I suppose the audience is up to a little bit, so I might go away and rehash that video, record it again, and maybe go into a little bit more depth on it, because I do think the Ares convention is incredibly interesting. So hopefully that will come about over the next few weeks. Anyway, I will leave it on that. I will thank you very much for watching, and I'll hopefully catch you again next time.